Hey everyone, my name's Stacey and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be talking about the squat. So through my years of experience in the fitness industry, and especially through my time spent as a military physical trainer, this has to be probably the number one movement or position that I see people struggle with the most. Now the squat is a complicated movement. It's a complicated position to get into. The reason for that is because it needs so many different aspects and so many different points of views to get yourself into a good squatting position. If you look at, for example, a brand new baby who has not taught themselves all these poor postures and sat at desks for hours and, been tight and not done anything about it, their squat is perfect. It's so beautiful. They've got really nice long straight back. Their hips can come below their knees. Their feet are flat on the ground, even in weight, and their chest is nice and tall. Now, these are the basic principles for a squat, and these are the things that we're going to work on today. Now, just to start off with, I do want to mention that not everybody wants to squat below hip distance. So below hips, below knees. And that is completely fine. And everybody has their own goals and their own reasons for wanting to do that. So today I'm just going to simply talk about how to get your squat better, why it's not good at the moment, and what you can do to improve. So let's just jump over to the mat now and I'll take you through some points. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is your hips and their role in a squat. Your hips are so important. If you are tight in your hips, are weak in your hips, or have very, very limited range or mobility in your hips, your squats are going to suffer. Your hips are the main driving force of your squat. If your hips aren't right, then your squat isn't going to be right. And you really need to address any issues you've got in here before you can even think about getting your squat to that really beautiful, comfortable position that is safe. So what are the limitations with the hips? We've got hip impingements or pinching in the front of the hip in the bottom of the squat position. So this is something that can be caused by quite a few different things. It can be coming from the tendon or a ligament. It can be coming from the actual joint itself, or it can be muscle related. So this is something that you may need to troubleshoot and look into with maybe a physio if it's something that you're not making any progress in, or if the hip tips that I give you today don't help. The other thing that we need to talk about is strength in the hips. So the squat relies heavily on the deep hip rotators on the outside of your hip. These ones that do external rotation, or they pull your knee away from the center line. So it's really important that we can get this knee away from the center line in a strong position. These muscles in here are responsible for that. So if yours are weak or tight, chances are when you get to the bottom of your squat, you'll be doing something like this, which is what I see all the time. We come down, we collapse in, we come up. Down, collapse in, come up. And that is simply a weakness in your glute med external rotator, your glute min, which is another muscle in here, and maybe even some of your piriformis as well, which is another rotator of the hip. The last element, I suppose, of your hips is the flexibility of the muscles around your hips. So the biggest, I think, influencer of what your hips can do is your hamstrings. So if you've got really, really tight hamstrings, then when you get down to, you get what's called a wink. So I'll show you now because I'm cold and I haven't done any warming up. So we get to about here, and then with some people, the bum tucks under. So see this? Bum tucking. Let me show you back here. So we move down, so my spine is neutral, neutral, neutral. Now my hamstrings are at their point or their peak, and my bum tucks under. Now see, my hips are tucking, and my back has gone from a nice neutral curve to a tucked under curve. So that is to do with your hamstring flexibility, also with the lower back. So if your lower back is tight, or if you've got limitations in your lower back. So they're the biggest things around the hip, and we're going to do a few exercises now to see if we can help that. Obviously, there are lots of other external factors. Your knees, so if you have problems with your knees, weaknesses or imbalances in your knees, then your squat is going to suffer. and your ankles are a big one as well. So if you've got limitations in your ankle mobility, your squat is not going to be able to get as low as you probably want it. So there's some ankle stuff you can do as well, and I'll talk about ankles in another video. But today we're going to focus on the hips. So I'm going to tell you everything that I do before I do a squatting session, especially if I'm doing strength related squats and I'm going to be under a lot of weight. The very, very, very first thing that I do before I get started is this sequence here. So this sequence is about limbering and stretching the muscles around my hips. So you'll start in this tabletop position. Tuck your toes under, walk your hands forward just a little bit and push your hips up to the ceiling. Now once you get here, you're going to pedal through the legs. So pedaling through the legs, straightening one and bending the other. This is opening up the hamstrings and the calves. So giving you more range from the muscles, allowing your hip joint to go through more range because there's less tightness and less holding it back. So we pedal through here for a second, just for a few movements. Then come to a center point. See if you can get both your heels down to the mat with a straight line in the back. If you can't do that, walk the hands out a little bit further and then go back. Keep walking out until you can feel like you can get your heels as close to the mat as possible with your back straight. What you don't want is this. You don't want to be rounding through the back because this is taking all of the stretch away from my hamstrings and my hips aren't opening. So hips point to the sky. Think about trying to tilt your hips forward. Now, from here, we're going to roll forward now. So we're in a plank. So this is starting to warm up the core, getting the core active, doing what it needs to do. And then we're going to lower down to the mat. So to the knees, to the mat, untuck your toes and do a little bit of a lift. So bring your elbows underneath your shoulders, lift your chest and try and pull it towards the wall in front. So this is doing a few things. It's opening up through the core, so it's giving you a stretch through the core, but it's also stretching through your lower back. So your lumbar spine and your lower back can also limit your squat. If you're tight or you don't have much mobility there, then there's less room to move. So we're going to sort of open here. Then we're going to tuck the toes under. Press back now all the way until we're in this child's pose position. Fold forward. So now we're going for flexion in the spine. We're opening up the flexors or the flexion movement in the spine, but we're also starting to prepare the hips for this closed position. So at the bottom of a squat, especially a deep squat, your hips are very closed in this exact position almost. So we're sort of preparing them for that movement. Come back to the tabletop position, push up again into that downward dog. So hips high. Each time we do this, keep trying to tilt your hips forward. Keep trying to gain more range in your hamstrings. And I do this probably about 3 or 4 times before I start a class or before I start squatting. Now we're going to go through a cat-cow series. Same principles here, opening through the hips via the spine. So giving some more movement in the spine so our hips have more room to move. So take a big inhale breath. And bring your chest forward, open up through the belly. Exhale breath, tuck the hips under, reach the mid-back towards the ceiling, round through the spine. Inhale, reach the chest forward, reach the crown and the tail apart from each other. Exhale, tuck the hips under, round through the spine. So do this about 4 or 5 times in your own time now. All right, so that is my warm up and limber. Now we're going to go deeper into the hamstrings to open up the hamstrings and the outsides of the hips. So this one is called elephant walk. What we do is we bring our feet hip distance apart. Take an inhale breath on the exhale, roll your body down so that you're folded over your legs. Now just for your reference, my hamstrings are really tight and quite sore today. So this will give you a good indication of how much progress I'm making just from this warm up. Now we're just bending the knees here, letting the upper body and the top of your body just relax over the legs. Now it's really important, I'll show you this from the side. It's really important that you keep even weight between your feet. So big toe, little toe, heel, and left and right foot has even weight. And we're just doing like we did before. We're doing pedaling through the legs. So straightening one, bending the other on a breath. Inhale, breath to change. Exhale, go into the stretch. So keep doing that. Let's do about 5 or 6 per leg. Okay, now for the elephant walk part. So I'm gonna come up a little bit closer to show you this one. So what we do here, we come down, we bend the knees until we can get our thigh in contact with our chest. Now we're going to bring our hands over to the right hand side and straighten our left leg. So right leg stays bent, our hands are next to the foot and we're straightening that left leg. Come back to the center, go to the other side. Hands beside that left foot, straighten the right leg. Come back to the center. So we'll show you this from the front. We come to the right hand side, straighten the left leg. Hold for a few seconds and breathe. Come back to the center, go all the way around. This time we straighten the right leg. All the while keeping the chest down towards the thighs or in contact with the thighs as best we can. And we're just straightening that opposite leg. So we do that about 6 times per side. Now once we've done that, let's come back to the center, straighten your legs and reach tall with your head. So try and get your head towards the wall in front of you and try and get your spine long. So this is another one, opening your hamstrings. Try and get your legs straight. So really try and get those legs nice and straight. Feel the tilt coming from your hips. So this is a tilt forward of the hips. Notice my spine and my back is completely long. We're aiming for that length. It doesn't need to be straight because the spine obviously has its natural curves and straightness isn't something that we should aspire to, but we should aspire to length. Length through the spine, opening up through the hamstrings. Again, we can do those little pedals if we need to. Breathing here. Excellent, excellent work. And the very last thing we're going to do in our limbering is what's called a Cossack sequence. So this does a couple of things. It starts to get the muscles ready in our legs and it opens up the adductors or the muscles inside. So when you're in the bottom of a squat, you know, you've got a lot of opening and length in here. And if you're tight, then you're just going to be fighting that constantly and it's going to make life a lot harder. So for our Cossack sequence, we take our feet nice and wide. So when you put your hands out, your feet are around about where your hands are. Take an inhale breath, tuck your hips under, get into a neutral spine. Exhale, bend your left knee. As far as you're comfortable, you can bring a chair or something in front of you to balance on and feel the opening here. So we're opening in the trailing leg and we're preparing the bent leg, starting to get some work and some movement in the hip. We're mimicking a squat here in the hip, in the foot. So we're trying to get our big toe, little toe and heel on the mat at the same time. Come back to the center, take an inhale breath. Make sure your feet are parallel to each other. On the exhale, come down. Now you can rotate that foot out a little bit on the bent leg. So again, feeling for this opening in here, but also feeling for the activation. So the hips closing, the knee is protected with the muscles, and our foot, big toe, little toe, heel is all on the mat. If you need to stop here, that's fine. I'd rather you stop here than come down here and be up on the toe or sinking back and falling over. So find that point where you can be nice and tall in the chest, safe and strong with this bent leg and opening and trailing. Let's go a couple more times each side. All right, so that's the Cossack done. That's our last limbering and a little bit of activation, and we're going to finish on activation of the external hip rotators. So these are the ones that I was talking about that get weak and can let your knees collapse, which is not what you want. It's a really bad position for your knees, and it's not really a strong position for squatting underweight. So we have got 2 exercises we're going to do. First one, let's lie on our sides. Heels, knees and hips are stacked on top of each other. Now I want you to lift your heels off the mat and get about 90 degrees at the knees. So you want your knees, it's like you're doing a sit-up, but you're on your side, you're lying on your side. Now, I want you to squeeze your heels together and lift your knee up to the ceiling. On an inhale breath, on an exhale, lower. Inhale, lift. Exhale to lower. Inhale to lift. Exhale to lower. And keep doing that until you feel this muscle just behind your hip pocket here, where your pocket would be on your pants, start to switch on. This is called a glute med, and it's responsible for that stability in the squat at the bottom. So keep going with that until you can feel it. You're gonna feel the bottom one as well working, which is great. Make sure your hips stay still. So what you want to avoid is this rocking and rolling backwards as you lift. Imagine that there is a rod going from your top hip down to your bottom hip, and it is completely anchoring your hips. Your hips have absolutely no movement here, except for the femur bone, so your big leg bone, externally rotating and adducting at the hip. Abducting, I should say. Last one. All right, so you would do that for about a minute. And then we're going to come into this kneeling position. So what this one does, this side lift, it gets all of your stability muscles around your hip working on the stabilizing leg, and you'll feel it there. But it also gets the glute med and your abductors working on the working leg. So what we're going to do, we just worked then on our right leg. So our right leg is going to come down as the stabilizer. And you'll see why that is in a minute. Left leg out long, so your heel is in line with your knee. And then fist comes down so it's in line, everything's in line. So roll this bottom hip forward. Bottom hip comes forward. That's really important. If you're folding at the hips and you're just sort of in this weird half plank thing, you're getting absolutely nothing out of this. So it's really important to pay attention to what your body's doing. Roll this bottom hip forward. I'll show you that from the side. So this is my hip back, this is hip forward. So you want to imagine, basically, that there's a brick wall behind you and you can't fold. You need to stay straight. All right, and what we do is keep this hip forward and we lift this leg up and then we just tap. So we lift and then we tap. Now, straight away, you should start feeling the stabilizing leg working because we did just use it. Oh, mine's cramping up. Because we did just use that in that side lying lift. So keep moving up through that. Keeping it under control, nice and slow. So we're not doing, this isn't, you know, a marathon here. This is a part of our warm up and this is our sequence getting ready for a squat. And then once we've done that for a minute, we roll over and we do everything on the other side. So I'll just take you through that quickly. Heels together, knees together, hips together, straight line from the heels up through the hips. Once we've got our position, raise the heels, squeeze the heels together, and use that activation here to lift the knee. So this is directly speaking to that glute med. And we're going to do this for a minute. All right, and to our side lift, so we just worked our left knee, so the left knee now comes down onto the mat. So that's the thing that you need to remember here. So we're going from a working move or an active movement to a stabilizing movement. So fist comes to the floor, knee, hand and heel is in line. Keep that bottom hip forward so we're not folding, and then we lift. And we do this one for about a minute, or you can count to 20 reps. For each of these exercises, you can do a minute or you can count to 20 reps. Completely up to you, depending how much activation you have. So if you feel like it's taking a long time to get that muscle active, do it for a little bit longer. All right, and the very last thing we're going to do, especially if we're preparing ourselves for a deep squat, if that's what you want. If you don't want to do a deep squat, you don't have to do one. But all of this stuff is still going to help you, especially if you are rolling on your toes or your knees are buckling in when you squat. All of this stuff is relevant to you 100%, and you should be doing it every time you go to exercise beforehand to warm yourself up. All right, if you're going to be doing squats. Our last one is just it's a modification seated squat, and basically we're mimicking a low squat position from a seated position. So we bring our feet just wider, pretty much where you would have them for a squat. Toes are pointed out just a little bit. Grab onto your ankles. From here, we're going to pull our knees apart and try and get our chest up tall. So our elbows are pulling our knees apart and our chest is pointing tall towards the sky. So this is doing a few things. It's opening up through the hips. It's getting our body ready for that deep movement. And it's sort of cueing you to get your chest high. And it's reminding your body chest needs to be high, because that's one of the biggest things we need to remember with the squat. Keep opening up here. Hold this for maybe 10 or 15 breaths. All right, and now we're ready to do our first squat. Now we always start unweighted. So if you're planning on going into a strength session or whatever it is you're gonna do, even if you're doing Smith machine assisted or leg press, anything where you're going into a squat position, folding at the hips, folding at the knee, then you should be doing this stuff to prepare. Honestly, it takes 10 minutes and it can be the difference between a back injury and not having a back injury. And if you ask anybody who has a back injury, they would take back time and go instantly to that point where they got the injury and add an extra 10 minutes to their routine to save them from having to go through that. So we're ready to squat. Now, let's go through our technique. Everybody's different. Every body, as in physical body, is different. So not one technique or not one stance is going to work for every person. So what I say is test and adjust. For me, I like heels just wider than my hips, toes pointed outwards slightly. Now, the rest of this can be followed pretty much as I do it, but your foot positioning is something you're going to have to play with over time. Now I'll turn to the side first. To initiate your squat, the first thing you need to do is plant your feet into the ground strong. So imagine you're pulling your toes apart and then pushing them into the mat. You're also pushing your heels into the mat and you're evenly weighted between your feet. Set yourself up strong from the base. The next thing you need to do is think about how you initiate the movement. So the initiation or the start of a squat is hips going back. So like this, what we did, this limbering exercise we did at the start, that's how you start your squat. So push your hips back until you get to that point where you feel like you need to counter the balance and you bend the knees. So let's just do that a few times. Stand up straight, spine neutral, squeeze your glutes, squeeze the muscles between your hips, belly button into spine, strong through the feet. Inhale, exhale, push your hips back, keep pushing back, then bend the knees just a little bit. Inhale, hold, squeeze those muscles we just used, those muscles outside of your hips, drive up. Neutral spine, belly button in, feet strong. Inhale, breath, exhale, hips back, and then a bend. Inhale, squeeze those muscles. Inhale, breath, exhale, drive back up. We'll do this one more time. Inhale, exhale, push back, hips back, little bend in the knees, long through the spine, T-zone or muscles between the hips, pulling in towards the belly button. Now we're gonna keep going. Take an inhale, breath, exhale, keep going down, keep long and really reaching through the spine. And you can see here now I've come just below knees with my hips. My spine is still long. I haven't gone into that dipping position. See my hips tucking under at the bottom here. So I haven't gone into that position. I'm still nice and neutral in my spine. My chest is tall. My feet are evenly weighted on the ground. My knees are pointed outwards. Let me show you that from the front. Come a little bit closer. So here's my setup position. I should have said as the start, do it without shoes on. You need the feedback in your feet. So pushing hips back, knees come wide. And here I am, just below knees. So my hips have just come below my knees. My feet are evenly weighted, my chest is tall. I can look at something above me even, and I am in a really strong position. Now to come up, squeeze those side glutes. Imagine you're trying to pull your feet apart from each other. Drive up. What we can then lead into after we've done a lot of squat prep is the full Malasana pose, which is a yoga pose. Where we come all the way down. We have that little bit of dipping, but we then bring our elbows inside the knees to assist in straightening through the spine. Then we get that big, long, straight spinal, full deep squat. And this is something to work into. And you can use pillows to sit on, and you can use a chair to brace yourself through all of those movements. So that is my chat about the squats. You know, that's something that I do every time I'm about to go do a squat session. But it's also a great thing to incorporate into your training, just to get in the habit of warming your body up well, limbering your body well, and connecting into your body before you just go and mindlessly pump out reps at something. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time in the studio.